Hi everybody, it's January 26th, 2025, and I'm in one of my happy places, Mackin Park, in the Millardville neighborhood of Coquitlam, British Columbia. Millardville is historically a Francophone neighborhood. Settlers from Quebec came to work in the Fraser Mill, this is on the Fraser River, and they settled here in Millardville. It's the largest Francophone neighborhood west of Winnipeg. So I'm posting these videos as a form of therapy to recover from the trauma of watching my little brother, Paul Kierans, 64, with Down syndrome, be locked up by David Eby and the British Columbia New Democratic Party government for 588 days. They locked up Paul when I complained about a fraudulent forged power of attorney they had secretly created, naming my 82-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario as Paul's substitute decision maker so that they could secretly give him the COVID-19 shot against the wishes of another sister who lives on Vancouver Island. The nun, I call her the evil nun, has never cared for Paul. She moved out into a convent when he was born. And unlike all the other family members in my family who have cared for Paul, my mother moved Paul out to be close to me on the west coast from Toronto in 1993. And I've lived within 30 kilometers of him since that time. I used to have care for Paul at my home on weekends, 1 or 2 weekends a month, and I took him to Newfoundland twice. He and I were I'm the 8th of 9 children, he was the 9th of 9 children. We were only 2 years apart. So Paul was my person. You know how everyone has a person? I was his person and he was my person. And the British Columbia government has acted in a horrifically fraudulent. It was really a form of torture, locking Paul up. I had an agreement with them where I could visit with Paul twice a week, once at his group home for an hour on Thursday and for 5 hours at my home, which he loved. He grew up in a family setting. When he was born, the doctors at Children's Hospital recommended to my father and to my parents that he be placed in an institution. Yes, he was profoundly disabled with Down syndrome. And my father said hell no and brought him home by himself on the train from Toronto to Sudbury. So it was very traumatizing, as you can imagine, for Paul and I to have him locked away. We were allowed a 10-minute telephone call once a week. He begged me in that I've recorded every single one of them. There were hundreds of them. And he begged me in every phone call to visit him and to visit me. And he told me over and over again that he loved me and I love him. So interfering with the attachment between family members this way is really a form of sadism. It's torture, state-sponsored torture. Even inmates at the maximum security prisons in Canada are allowed to visit in person with their family members. The lawyer for the group home, Larsh, didn't want me to have the opportunity to have Paul tested to show that he was incapable of appointing a substitute decision maker and to get an authentic sample of his signature, which was a forgery. So what happened was I had complained on August 26th of 2022, I complained to the Burnaby RCMP that the document was a fraud for lack of capacity and a forgery. And the constable that I spoke to said that she was going to get a subpoena the original document and interview the witnesses who had put their signatures on the document. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the provincial New Democratic Party had signed as the person who was to supervise the document my disbarred brother who lives in the 8,000 kilometers away in the Czech Republic. So that was the person that was to do the oversight. He was found, he was disbarred by the Law Society of British Columbia for malfeasance with regards to 4 different vulnerable clients. But the government of British Columbia, the New Democratic Party government, the socialist, commie, sadistic New Democratic Party government had appointed the 82-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario as my brother's substitute decision maker, and to oversee her management of that decision making, they appointed my 78-year-old disbarred brother who had fled to the Czech Republic after being disbarred by the Law Society of British Columbia. So Paul and I, in one of the last telephone calls I had with Paul, he said, "Kathleen, take me to a movie." It really feels like torture when you want to visit a loved one and the state does not permit you to do so. This David Eby is the self-appointed leader of the New Democratic Party in British Columbia. I call him Evil Eby. I'm sorry for laughing, but if you don't laugh, you're going to cry. So what keeps on coming up in my mind is, the way this story ended is that I spoke with Paul on April 12th of 2024. And it was, another sad phone call. And then apparently he had some kind of brain incident. He may have fallen and smashed his head or been hit by someone. He had a wound on the side of his head. But on April 15th, I got an email from my evil nun sister's evil lawyer, Casey Deanshaw, saying that I could arrange a visit at the hospital, that Paul had had a stroke and I could arrange a visit at the hospital. So they had waited. They wanted to see if he was going to die before she decided that she had better fly out from Ontario. This was 26 days after a decision at the Court of Appeal dismissing my application to be appointed Paul's guardian. And I think Paul just gave up. So the way it ended is I got an email on April 15th saying that Paul had had a stroke, but I could arrange a visit at the hospital. So I was allowed to visit with him for 10 minutes. I jumped in a cab and I asked the cab driver to say a prayer for Paul. And when I saw Paul, he grabbed my hand and I said, "Paul, it's Kathleen." And he squeezed my hand so tight and he wouldn't let it go. We were only allowed a 10-minute visit, even though the purported reason for us not being able to visit was that his group home staff didn't like me. And we were in a Burnaby hospital, so that was certainly not a reason there. It was sadistic torture. It's the worst miscarriage of justice in Canadian history. So Paul appeared to me to be struggling to recover. He had on an oxygen mask, and for some reason one of his hands was tied down. But he was struggling to recover, and he had sat up and grabbed a book from my hand and turned the pages perfectly and looked at the pictures in the book. But when I posted on Facebook that he appeared to me to be recovering, he couldn't recover. The nun could not stay in British Columbia, and when she found out that I had been told, the Ottawa RCMP ordered the Burnaby RCMP to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. And as soon as she knew that, Paul had to die. As soon as she knew that I knew, Paul had to die. So the next time I saw him, his oxygen mask had been removed, and he appeared to me to be sedated to death. I believe that she instructed the doctor to do medical assistance in dying on him, which is administering a lethal injection. Paul's little heart couldn't handle having the oxygen mask removed and having a lethal sedative administered by the hospital staff. So I complained to the coroner, and I understand that there's an ongoing investigation by the RCMP into his death, and it's into the fraudulent forged power of attorney. So what I see as being a nexus with what's going on in the world and what happened, this torturous, horrific experience that I've just been through, and I'm just like an ordinary Canadian citizen, hardworking, raised 2 kids by myself, was the first student with 2 kids to graduate from University of British Columbia Law School. Worked hard my whole life, employed many people. And this is the thanks that I get from the evil BC New Democratic Party government. So what I see is happening, and as I think in the news and what everyone's aware of in Canada right now, is that Donald Trump has threatened to make Canada the 51st state with Castro's bastard child as our 51st, as the governor of the 51st state. Pardon my language, I just went to Mass. I hope God will forgive me. But that's what he said. And he keeps on saying it. He said it at Davos. He made an appearance at Davos on the internet by Zoom, and he threatened to make Canada the 51st state. And what I've been saying for, since 2021, I've been warning everyone. I had a YouTube video channel dedicated to this, that this medical assistance in dying that Fidel Castro's bastard brought into Canada, which has resulted in the killing by the state of 60,000 Canadians, all vulnerable, all impoverished, all disabled, including veterans. So medical assistance in dying. And by the way, the first thing I did as a lawyer, as a retired lawyer, is I looked up the meaning of the word medical, and it's from the Greek to heal. That's the origin of the word. You don't heal anyone by killing them. So Canada's reputation has been besmirched and destroyed by this practice of killing our most vulnerable. And it just slipped in. Nobody voted for it. Nobody asked for it. And it's impossible. The only way when Hitler started in the 1930s by killing the sick and vulnerable and disabled in Germany, and he cleared out all the hospitals and sanatoriums. He called them useless mouths. And everybody thought, oh, that makes sense. They are kind of useless mouths. But what I was thinking today is it destroys the social contract of humanity, that we live in a society where we expect that our lives will not be snuffed out at the convenience of the state. But communist socialist parties like the New Democratic Party in British Columbia and in Canada, and which was founded by Tommy Douglas, the Saskatchewan preacher, is what all they want to do is gain as much power over people as possible. And what's the ultimate power? Killing people. Canada's killed 20 people today. 20 plus people today. 5 out of every 100 deaths in Canada is caused by a doctor or a nurse administering a lethal injection into the arm of a vulnerable person. And they don't need to be sick. They can be disabled. They don't have to have a reasonably foreseeable death. There's not somebody in horrific pain on death's door and, what's the difference, between today and a week from now? No. Anyone that is supposedly capable can ask to be killed. And they're not just, they offer it. It's not a matter of asking for it, they offer it. This has to stop. I'm telling you, we will lose Canada. Trump will make us the 51st state. Trump will make us the 51st state, because that's the premise on which Germany was invaded and occupied Europe was invaded. Was Hitler was killing innocent, vulnerable people at a breakneck speed. And that's what Canada's doing. British Columbia has the highest rate of euthanasia in Canada. 5 out of every 100 deaths in Canada is caused by a doctor sticking a needle in the arm of a vulnerable person. And I believe that is what happened to my brother. He had his oxygen mask removed, and he was administered some kind of sedative. I watched my brother be killed. It's like some kind of horror movie that you can't make up. So whatever it takes, we have to have another election. I wrote Pierre Poilievre. I said, "What's your stand on euthanasia? Are you going to recriminalize?" The first thing that Fidel Castro's bastard child did when he came into power was he decriminalized marijuana and murder. Not a good combination. The payoff for the decriminalization of murder was marijuana. Who could complain, right? So I asked Pierre Poilievre, and he actually wrote me back, although he was one of the very few, in fact, he's the only, until recently, he's the only politician that has ever written me back, and I've written them, every single one of them. And he said, no, he's not going to roll back euthanasia in Canada. He's not going to change a thing. Once governments get their hands on these powers, they never give them up. It's like income tax was started in Canada to fund World War I. And that was supposed to be a stopgap measure to fund World War I. Well, do you think we're paying income tax now? Of course we are. But this cannot be. We will be invaded by the United States. This will be the excuse. Just as occupied Europe was invaded by the Allies in World War II. They'll say a society that cannot even care and that for its vulnerable citizens and that kills its most vulnerable citizens cannot go on. And it will be Trump's excuse to invade and annex Canada as the 51st state. So that's all I have to say for today. Do what you can, but we have to bring an end to euthanasia in Canada.